Howdy! Possum Patty here. It's April 16th and I'm nature journaling. It's a breezy sunny day, but the temperature is only in the 40s, a little bit cooler than normal. So I put on my winter jacket today and went outside for a short walk. While I was over here in this part of the yard, where the wood anemones and the unfurling fiddleheads and the new sedge, carrot sedge I saw are, I noticed the bark on this tree had this black spider vein-like growth on it, so I'm going to take a piece of that inside. And check it out. It's a birch tree, so it has peely bark, so you'll look for a piece of bark that's already coming off, and then I'll bring that in. The first thing I saw was an unusual growth on the birch tree bark. So I took a piece of that bark into the house and looked at it with my zoomie. I kind of remembered what this was because last year I did a special project called hashtag 100-day project. And what I did for 50 days, I didn't get to 100 days, but what I did for 50 days in my journal, every day I picked one thing from the yard and drew it in my journal. And there's lots of moss and lichens, of course. It's funny, the smaller this structure, the bigger I drew it in the book. Club moss, lichens, moss, more lichens, more lichens, more moss. And here's what I was looking for. It's Frulandia. It's the liverwort that grows high on trees. What else did I draw last spring? Let's see, we have the spring azure butterflies, fiddleheads. Oh, I found a mushroom, a spring mushroom, which you don't always see. And those fuzzy fiddleheads, Candida mayflowers, jelly, fungus. Oh, here's the wood anemone, Anemone cinquifolia. And I found a twig with lots of different kinds of lichens and the sweet white violets and the Cecil bellwort. Let's see, it's just toward the end of April. I'll have to go looking for those. More lichens and fungus, skunk cabbage, ferns, more violets, another liverwort, more fungus, ferns unfurling, high bush blueberries blooming. This was in May. More fiddleheads, another white flower, star flowers. And here's the shin leaf starting to bloom. This was in May. Little jack-in-the-pulpits, cabbage whites, butterfly. I think this is a similax. Painted lady butterfly. The summer sweet. The leaves were out. Just towards the middle of May. Saw a garter snake and a frog jumping into a puddle. Oh, little painted turtle out by the mailbox. Picked him up out of the road. Wild geraniums. Jack-in-the-pulpits were blooming. Got hay-scented ferns, and this is a cinnamon fern. And the Candida mayflowers were blooming. This was May 20th. And then I listed all the ferns I had found. New York fern, Christmas fern, marsh fern, royal fern, cinnamon fern, hay-scented fern, bracken, sensitive, interrupted, lady, and wood fern. And then I went on to something else because at that point I had to go away for a week and do some elder care, and I stopped participating in the 100-day project. So I should go back and look at this as a good reference to what I saw last spring. But if you notice, there are no grasses, no sedges, and no rushes. Completely ignored them last year. I have lots of flowers and moss and lichens, a couple liverworts and some mushrooms, lots and lots of ferns, some butterflies and reptiles, and amphibians, and no grasses, no sedges, no rushes. So I'm glad I'm including those this year. Why'd I take this out? Oh yeah, Frulandia, the liverwort. This is the exception to the rule. It's a liverwort that grows on a tree. Most mosses and liverworts, they're called bryophytes, they have a very delicate structure, and they lack a waxy cuticle or outer covering. So they like to live in moist places or maybe sheltered microhabitats or like along creeks and rivers where they can stay moist. Some mosses can go dormant for weeks or months at a time, so you might find them in drier areas. But very few liverworts can survive any kind of drying out, and you almost never see them in dry places, with the exception of the Frulandia, which is a liverwort that grows up high up on a tree on the bark. What was interesting in this Frulandia, when I looked at it with my zoomy microscope, was that I actually saw some green. Usually when I look at it, it's completely dormant and just brown. But this one actually had some green new growth on it. And maybe because we've had so much rain lately that this Frulandia was taking advantage of that and growing. That doesn't look like much to look at, but when you look at this under the zoomy, I saw at least 3, there's probably more kinds of lichens. There was one here, definitely a lichen. And then there were these little beige areas, those were lichens. And then there was a moss growing on the trunk of on the bark also. So I put down moss, and then we have the Frulandia. Oh, and these little black dots, that's probably little black dot lichens. I think there were some other lichens too, but they were hard to see with the zoomy. So I had painted this picture, and then I realized I wanted to label all these things, so I made just a little key down here to note the Frulandia and the beige lichen and the little black dot lichen and the big leafy lichen over here. And then I noted that I don't always see new green sections of Frulandia, and I noted the moss. And why do I always leave off the last letter of a word? I have no idea. So this was a fun page to do. And the other thing that I saw was this amazing new sedge. And I'm just looking out at everything turning green, and I want to go check out those green blades coming up, because once you learn a sedge, now I'm going to be seeing sedges everywhere. Here's a little club moss and the Canada Mayflowers, the moss growing on the bottom of this tree, and there's the new sedges I found. Ooh, and these are very different. And they seem to be coming up everywhere. Everywhere, everywhere. And it looked black from a distance, but when I looked at this under the zoomie, oh my goodness, how beautiful it was. Sort of like a cocoa brown with green stripes. Gorgeous. And then I cut one open and looked at the stem, and it was triangular. Sedges have edges. And then you can also see the leaves inside the stem. That was quite interesting. The other thing that I looked at under the zoomie was the leaf very closely. And they have a linear, this is linear leaf, and parallel veins running up the linear leaf. So I know this is the reproductive part, but I don't think it's opened yet, so I have to keep an eye on these. And what's interesting to note is this was growing in a very small clump, almost like individuals, where the sedge I was looking at yesterday had a very thick clump. Very shorter blades of grass, seemed like they were tougher, and it was a very thick clump of leaves, where these seemed to be more separate and taller too. These were taller. And the reproductive structures on the 3 sedges that I found so far are completely different looking. These were like black spikes. These were kind of a reddish brown, and some were hanging and some were close to the leaf and the axil, between the leaf and the stem. And then this one was different too. Long, very long and delicate, and the flower on the top was kind of spindly at the top. There was just one there. Here's the other one. So if you look at this, and you look at this, and you look at this, you can see how they're very different in the reproductive structures, and then the way they were growing, their growth habitat was different too, where these seem more like single ones, and this was all in a clump, and these were in smaller clumps. Very delicate leaves, not all tough together like this one. I'm so happy my tea bag this morning told me that I was unlimited, because there's just so much to see, so much to learn in nature, that it's good to know that I am unlimited, because I'm just going to keep going and every day learn a little about the mosses and the liverworts and the lichens and the flowers and the trees and the ferns and the insects and the butterflies and the sedges and the grasses and the weather and the clouds. Well, you get the idea. But I am never bored, and I am grateful for nature journaling. Thanks for coming along today. Bye-bye.